to my channel, The Grim Reader. I am Kathy Grimm, The Grim Reader, and I am here with another weekly update since last Sunday. Let's see about the etc. stuff. I am busy, and sometimes I have little freakouts because I'm so busy, but then they get resolved and I move on with all the things I have to do. Like even tonight, I should do some things. There are some things I should do before I go to bed, but for some reason, I still wanted to make a video, so it's okay. And let me think. And so everything is fine in my own little not important world compared to the terrible goings on of the rest of the world. But we think Lily might be not entirely well again. She's been doing what we figured out she was doing last year when we had the whole long time of her peeing where she shouldn't be, voiding, namely on poor Bill's bed. And then we would have to, so she started doing that again. And so I think we're going to try and just get her back on just eating her food that she's supposed to eat. So she was diagnosed with bladder stones. She had a whole bunch of bladder stones in her bladder, and it was making her not happy. And it took us a while to actually figure out who of the cats was doing this. And then we took her to the vet. It took us a while. And then that's what they diagnosed her with. And I don't think there was any intervention other than dietary. We just put her on this diet of the special food, dry food and wet food. Anyway, it may have returned. So, if it's not one cat going on and it's another, but that's just how it is. And I still don't think that Mr. T is completely normal, but he's never really been completely normal for that. He's always been a slightly odd kitty. Anyway, just cat stuff. Taking care of our little kitty family. Let me see, anything other than just being busy? Not really. It's just everything is going fine. What I need to sort of think about is what the best type of self-care or prioritization of self-care looks at for the likes of me. So hyper worry, anxiety, chronic pain. And one of the negative spirals I fall into is thinking that the fact that I don't move enough and don't sort of prioritize movement is due to me being lazy as opposed to me being fatigued or in pain. And so, I have to kind of resolve that knot. And, like if these issues don't get resolved in a meaningful way, I might even consider trying to seek out a therapist. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm sort of borderline with that. I'm get into the reading though. It's been going fairly well. So I think I've put aside the long Victorian novel by Charlotte Young, Pillars of the House. I still kind of liked it, but it is very churchy, and it's very much about having different characters come into the sphere of the story, and basically it seems to be like it's going towards their finding God and finding religion. And it's still somewhat of interest, but it's so long and I'm kind of over it a little bit. So I think I'm going to put it aside. Maybe I'll come back to a different Young. I still kind of liked it. I mean, but so right now I'm also not sleeping very well, and it's hard for me I sort of have been scrounging around for reads in a not always very productive way. But so, for example, one thing I did, I kind of get into these phases where I watch a big booktuber and just kind of try to get ideas or something, and so one of the ones, the big booktubers that I've been watching, because I really do like her, she does these like almost like TikTok type videos where she shows you how she cooks and how she gets cozy for the evenings and all her cozy hobbies. And it's Reagan Peruse from Peruse Project. She has a lot of followers and she's been around for a long time, she's very she's like a lot of fantasy, but I really like her house and her cozy stuff, and the fact that she does puzzles and stuff like that, all the cozy stuff. And so I've been watching her, and what I did was, one thing I've done is downloaded things that she's been reading, just the samples. I'm not going to buy anything until I commit it, just to see if I like them enough to want to read them. So this is sort of outside of my wheelhouse, and it's much more, it's maybe what one would call new adult. For example, there's a new novel by, I think her name is Cassandra Clare. She's a big name in YA fantasy, I guess. Sorry, I haven't even done a good research on this. And she has a new novel out that I started, and it was, so let me see, sorry, let me see if I can get there. Yeah, here she is. Cassandra Clare, there she is. And then her book that I've downloaded is a Sword Catcher. And they're always really pretty books. They're very pretty looking. And I just have it on the Kindle, so it's not that pretty on the Kindle. And so I started reading it, and it's so it's weird because, like, plot-wise it's actually kind of interesting, but the writing is a little bit cringy. Like, it's the type of writing where even and I'm not an editor of any type, but I sort of want to get rid of words. Like, you don't need to say, you could say it this way and it would sound better. Why do you say it this way when you could say it with, and I don't have any examples in front of me right now, but so the writing is, and that's going to be the kicker for me. Like, if I am enthralled enough with the plot, I'll keep reading, but if the writing gets too awful, I'll be like, why am I wasting my time? Life is too short for, you know what, writing. Unless you're really intrigued by the story. But I don't want to be, back a little bit earlier this year, for some reason I ended up listening to the latest Nora Roberts called Identity, and I didn't hate it. It was it's obviously sort of written for a very wide audience. It's not sort of literary at all, but it was readable, it was listenable, the characterizations were okay. It had you kind of went with it. It had a flow. And then there's some other, so I was watching one of Reagan's reading vlogs. She does these cozy reading vlogs type thing. And there were some other books, I forget the names of them, but I'll come back to you if I do pick them up beyond just a sample. And so the point of this whole little narrative, if there is one, is that me not sleeping well, and my issue is that I sleep in shifts, like polyphasic. Like, I'll get really tired early and go to bed, and then I'll wake up and be awake for some hours. And it's okay if you can then go back to bed for some hours, but sometimes when you want to get up at 5, that's kind of hard, and you end up being awake at 2, and then you get up at 5. So strange. And anyway, but that happened last night, and I was sort of trying to be okay and journaling. And actually the other thing, that reminds me, so I was reading, trying to look around for things to read. I went back to the Young, and then at some point I have now decided to not go back to that one. And then what I ended up reading quite a bit of were self-help books, specifically ones connected to highly sensitive stuff. Like, I have self-diagnosed myself as a highly sensitive person, which I think it's pretty obvious probably to the rest of the world that I am that. and perhaps even an empath. But there's a lot of self-helpy type stuff connected to being highly sensitive. And I was reading one book. It was about No, it wasn't Thriving. It was a different title. So yes, I'm sorry, I'm back with some other titles. So the book that I finished was called The Healed Empath. And I did read it. I flicked through all the pages on my Kindle. And The Healed Empath, the highly sensitive person's guide to transforming trauma and anxiety, trusting your intuition, and moving from your overwhelm to empowerment. And it wasn't very good. I mean, I gave it 3 stars, but to be honest, I didn't find the writing very strong, and it didn't really give me all those things. Like, I didn't really feel, it wasn't like succinct enough in giving me the bullet points of how to transform my trauma and trust my intuition. It was more flaky and fluffy, and she would say things like, crystals are great, but from a kind of her point of view, like, that's nice for you, but to just sort of then write a book about how that means they're going to be nice for me is a little bit of a presumptive stance, I would suggest. I don't know, perhaps not very empathic, I don't know, but maybe I'm being harsh on it. It wasn't very convincing, or the writing wasn't strong. And you know me, I'm a bit picky about writing. So the other books I have here, so I have as a book the Thriving one. The lady Judith Orloff is the sort of the be and end all of the empath world, so to speak. And I have her yearbook, and I also have her book called The Empath Survival Guide. And she's okay, she's quite good. She's also, she can get into the crystal thing, but with her it's in the way she packages it is just more convincing or plausible to me, or more just I don't know. And then the other book I have here is another person who sounds familiar. I don't know. It says I've read 37% of this, but do I remember? This is The Highly Sensitive Person, How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You by Elaine Aron, PhD. So I don't remember that one. Maybe I'll go back to it. But I mean, it's on here. I'm reading it apparently. And then one book that I keep coming back to that I actually think is very good, and that's to do with chronic illness. And I think she's actually a really good writer, Toni Bernard. It's very sort of personal from her own experience with chronic illness, specifically in her case, I think chronic fatigue, and it's sort of the mysteries of how it came upon her. But I remember her describing it, how she was on a trip to Paris and got extremely fatigued so that she was lying around in Paris. Oh, it was just so hard. And so it's called How to Be Sick. There's 2 editions. This is the second, a Buddhist-inspired guide for the chronically ill and their caregivers. And I do like the Buddhist approach of it all. I think it's kind of, it works for me at least. And the only thing I'll say about it is, I remember reading sections of this when I was in the midst of my really bad sciatica attack, where I was in great pain for many days, couldn't get any relief, went to the doctor, got a shot of steroids, didn't really help much, had an excruciating weekend of pure pain where I could find almost no comfort in any position at all, except sort of moving around like with the flat and then with the knees up, and any kind of movement. It was just horrendous. And then I remember distinctly trying to get dressed on one day and falling, just collapsing. The knees buckle with sciatica. The left knee buckles, and it happened again another time, the falling. That's really scary. Point being, they put me on, was it oral steroids? Yes, it was the pill type. And that just, I think I mentioned this before in a previous video, they just make you completely loopy in a sort of euphoric way, or at least, but also extremely emotional way. And so I was reading this book and I had tears running down my eyes, because she was sort of saying things that just rang true for someone in your position, in the terms of you need help, you have to ask for help, but you hate asking for help. You're in this sort of, to be dependent on your fellow human beings. And I was just so grateful that the people in my vicinity who I had to ask for help, specifically my colleagues, were very friendly, and they helped me. I had to sort of say, please, I can't do this task that you have assigned me to do. And it was basically because it was a public thing of going up in front of a group of people, and I was just really afraid that I would buckle, that I would walk up there with my stick or whatever. I had to use a stick, and then I would fall down. And the idea, so this is the way my strange brain works. What really upset me about that notion of that happening is that how I would be the center of attention, as opposed to the people who were supposed to be the center of attention for this event. I was just really, really anxious about calling attention to myself by falling. And so I really just didn't want to do, and so they did it. Anyway, but I remember distinctly that morning reading that stuff and just feeling very emotional about it. And that's the thing about steroids, is they really make you even more emotionally on edge. And it was sort of like, I sort of think about it a lot, how it wasn't bad, because it wasn't like at the end of the steroids, I remember sort of thinking how even the thought of food was very uplifting, like this delicious food. Like you're much more attuned to the good things, like taste or everything. I don't know, it was hard to describe. But then the crash, or I think I titrated down, but not enough, because there was that one day when I was in the middle of teaching. This is all happening while I'm teaching. And I called Bill and said, I don't know if I can teach anymore. I felt so dizzy and like strange. And I got through the day and it was all fine. I don't think my students noticed. I mean, I'm already a somewhat wacky, eccentric teacher lady. So, they probably just didn't even notice, but I was like, wow, I was just very dizzy at the end. Coming off of it was hard, even the next few days. So anyway, point being, the self-helpy stuff does kind of get me, does help me, does give me something. Yes, and so there's that, but that's not like the real reading. That's not the real reading, I guess. Well, and then continuing on with things that I'm not reading but would read if I had time. I had this book that I showed you last time, and what I would really want to get into, and I'm going to try and do it if I have time, is to read the Samhain, the stuff for this time of the year, which is the rhythm of the wheel. And also I like this idea. It's sort of new age. It's not even new agey. It's parapsychology. This idea of the thinning of the veil. So this idea that apparently in the Celtic tradition, the other world is a parallel realm that exists alongside ours. It's the world of fairies, spirits, and ghosts, of peculiar coincidences and magic. Under normal circumstances, we don't usually see what happens in the other world, but there are plenty of stories about people who got swept up into it or visited it accidentally. And so, it's very Harry Potter, very like Muggles, whatever. But the idea that the veil between these two worlds wears thin at certain times of the year. And even though I don't really put much credence into it, I am interested in folkloric stuff, specifically Celtic stuff is interesting. And so, yeah, it would be fun to read these things. And then I was looking through it, and it had something about heavy emotions and experiencing loss, or just heavy emotions. And that made me think of another book that I would read if I have time, and I will get back to. I think I've shown this before, but I haven't had a chance to really read it yet. I know some people have. Is this idea of the wintering book, about wintering, the time when you sort of have to retreat in order to get through something that's difficult or dark. And it's also kind of set up in a date type way, and I wanted to maybe dip into the November description of it and see what she says. I don't know if I'll like it. It may be. I'm very picky with these books, as you can tell. I go in and out of what I like. Anyway, so that's that. Let me get back to the actual books. I mean, not that these are not actual books, but you know what I mean, the fiction, whatever. Originally, I thought I might have time to do some kind of nonfiction stuff, but no, I just don't. So the Forsyte Saga is going well. I'm listening to this, even though I have a feeling this one would probably be even better if I could read it, because I think the prose is excellent. I think it's really good. I'm 470 in the book, and then in the audio. And this is split up. So published in 1922 altogether, but it was he wrote it in distinct subsections, and so there's like the first novel was actually written in 1906. I'm peering at my thing here, and then the second one that I'm in is 1920, and then there's a third one, 1921, and then those three parts have stories in the middle, interludes between them. And the first interlude between them was sort of this kind of poetic, lyrical depiction of the older Jolyon basically dying and his last days, and how pleasant they were in a certain sense, and how it is connected to his interactions with one of the other main characters. It's called Indian Summer of a Forsyte, but it was really quite well done, and really, really sort of lyrical and sort of dreamy and peaceful, and he has a real connection with this person. And I'm being deliberately vague for sort of plot reasons. There is a lot of plot. It is a saga, and I have, because I've scrounged around on the internet, I have seen some spoilers of what's going to happen, and it is going to go through the generations, just like I said Buddenbrooks did. It's interesting to see the two. I glanced at an article sort of comparing the two novels and how different they are in the author's oeuvre. Like Buddenbrooks sort of set Thomas Mann on his path to be great German writer, and he goes on to write other fantastic novels, Magic Mountain and Dr. Faustus and other things. Whereas with Galsworthy, his star kind of has come down, and he's apparently not that well thought of, even though I think the writing is very good. I don't think there's that much difference to the Buddenbrooks, but this is his big work. And he's not that famous for anything other than this. I mean, I'm sure there are other things, but this is his sort of end point, not a beginning, as Buddenbrooks is for Mann. And, I think basically it is a kind of deliberation or reflection on England, what makes up the English psyche, and sort of the end of the Victorian era and moving on into modernity. It doesn't take place in that time. It's not contemporary with when it was written. It's a little bit further back, but coming into modernity, into the 20th century. And what's interesting is, after reading so much Trollope, you sort of, they talk about the beginnings of electricity, or just the way, and also because they're different writers, it's not the same guy, but the way he talks about food is somewhat different. And and of course this one is more critical, I think, of the system in a certain sense, and specifically of the patriarchal aspects of the system, honing in on the one marriage and this one woman, and one of the Forsytes, who is the man of property, and that seems to be his problem, is that he cannot distinguish between things being property and people being property, and one thing I didn't realize is how much the Boer Wars are going to play a part in the background, and then maybe even in the foreground of the novel. So the Boer Wars, I didn't know that much about them. Now I've done a tiny bit of research. There were two of them. The first one was actually, the Boers kind of won the first one, and I didn't even, how could I not understand that the Boers, the word itself comes from the Dutch word for farmer, and so German it's Bauer, so Dutch for Bauer is Boer, and they're the Dutch immigrants who went over to these areas of South Africa, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, and butted heads with British colonialists. And one of the terms that keeps coming up is suzerainty, the strange legal term of uber sovereignty. And anyway, it's a bit sort of technical, but yeah. And the only thing I remember, when I was a little kid, we had this book. It was a book of illustrations about history. I forget what it was called, The World. And it was really good. It had a lot of pictures of Victorian, like, poverty, people living in squalor, and it had a bit about the Boer War. And I remember distinctly reading how the British set up the first, what came to be known as concentration camps, and they put the women and children of the Boers in these camps, and a lot of them died because of the conditions just being so horrendous. So the Brits go down in history as having set up this idea of a concentration camp. And I would like to find out more. Now, I know that there's a Churchill connection to the Boer War, that he kind of was a soldier there. It's very much a part of British colonial history, and not in a good way. So if you have any sort of hints, that's the thing. If you have any hints of other texts, the one sort of other media that I connect with the Boer War is an Australian movie, which is excellent, called Breaker Morant. So sort of Australian New Wave from the 70s. Excellent acting, great Aussie actors in this movie, about this Breaker, this bush soldier type who ends up in the Boer Wars, and he becomes a kind of scapegoat for sort of overbearing practices of the colonial officers against the Boers. But there's also this tension of the fact that he was an Australian, I think, and then he becomes a sort of martyr. But on the other hand, he did kill. He's not a sort of a peaceful fellow at all. But I do remember that movie being very good, and I started watching. It's free on YouTube. It's very good. It's Bruce Beresford, but that's a good movie, and that's sort of my things that I associate with the Boer Wars. Anyway, and I didn't realize that it was going to play a part in the background here. And of course, this is another sort of personal moment here. When I was going and looking at the Boer Wars and then even Breaker Morant, I really kind of have to be careful with my hobby of ancestoring, for lack of a better term. So my very large and well sort of deep tree on Ancestry.com. Has thousands of people on there from my family. And it's not that useful. I mean, it's good on the one hand to find out these stories, but on the other hand, I was thinking about last night how it's almost like a video game for me. Like, I cannot extricate myself from going down paths and looking up things and trying to find stuff out, or just clicking on the little leaves that it gives you in a semi-productive but also semi-wasteful way. And my goal, I wanted to see if I had any relatives who had fought in the Boer Wars. I'm sure I do, but that what happens when I go on there and then I get sucked into wherever I was before, looking up some other relative or some other part of the tree. And I go on and I find out stuff, and I find out that people are doing research on this other relative and have written books about other relatives. Like, it's just never ending. And the never ending aspect is kind of dangerous because, time is ending. And like yesterday, for example, I wanted to do other things and I ended up quasi wasting time on my Ancestry page after doing this, going from Foresight Saga to Boer Wars to Breaker Morant to my own stuff, and then before I knew it, Alice had disappeared. So I do have to be careful. There's something to be said for do what brings you joy, but you have to I have to sort of make sure it is, it's not just mindless scrolling or even mindless ancestrying. I don't know. It's tricky. And it's all made more difficult because of lack of time. I think, I forgot the new thing that I started. So I have given up on the yarn, and I'm only at the very beginning, but I am really, really enjoying it. And that is Lauren Groff's Matrix. So the sort of modern retelling of Marie de France, who I want to look up more about. I don't really know much about Marie de France or even Eleanor, her queen. So this is I'm very much at the beginning, but you can sort of tell it's very modern. Its take on, it takes place in the 12th century, I gather, 1158, as she comes to this abbey that's all run down, and she's being sort of ousted there from the court. And just the sort of surreal or impressionistic, her taking in her new life in this abbey, and it's all cold. It's dreadfully cold, and their lives are of course governed by the prayers, the different types of prayers that they say throughout the day. And also she's very good at interweaving the interpersonal drama and the rivalries and also the fact that Marie coming into this place, she's supposed to be the abbess, the new abbess, even though she's young, she's 17, and she has to sort of navigate and make her way through all these nuns and their own difficulties and dramas, and just the world that she's being flung into this. And also the nuns are starving, they're not doing well food wise, and they're waiting for her dowry. And so it's sort of impressionistic, it's very modern, and I think I'm gonna love it. I think it's gonna be good. It's my first Lauren Groff, and it was making me think of other sort of modern medieval things. I haven't had a chance to watch Renee's video where she talks about, she was talking about what's her name, Motesha Ostfeld, whose book, The Year of Relaxation, I really did like. I thought that was really good, and I really like her as a person. The interviews I've seen with her, I think she's really smart, but I haven't read anything else. And so this one kind of reminded me, or made me think back to whatever it's called, the medieval book about that she wrote with the lamb on the cover, Lebovner, that everyone says is really kind of dark and disgusting, and sort of it's in the muck of the medieval times, and then you get a little bit of that here too, with they're trying to get the lice out of her clothes, and they say hang it up in the lavatories of the nuns, because that'll get the lice out. So there's this hilarious moment right at the beginning where they say, you need to take a bath, and so this is taking place in Lent, so whatever, March, I guess, late Lent. and they say, oh, you need to take a bath. She says, no, I don't. I took one in November. I think that's what she says. The thing is November. It was much further back than, oh yeah, here's the bath thing. Mary says thank you, but she needs no bath, that she bathed in November. And the abbess laughs and says that cleaning the body is a form of prayer, and that all nuns bathe every month, and that the servants bathe every 2 months, for God is displeased by bodily odors. So yeah. Yeah. Whenever I chuckle at things like that, I always wonder how people in the future will look at us, if they'll think we're a bunch of, you know, I don't know, uncivilized beings from a different era, and one hopes that they will have pity on us or understanding. Anyway, so, but I think it's going to be good. Tell me if you've read it, if you've read any other Graph. I think I started The Fates and Furies and I wasn't like that into it, but you know, this is medieval stuff, you know, give me anything that's a little bit reminiscent of Kristin Lavransdatter, and I'm there for it. And there's another sort of medieval book that I was thinking of. Oh, what was it? No, I can't think of it. If it comes to me, I'll let you know. I was just thinking there's Osweg. Anyway, 22 minutes, that just seems to be where I'm at these days. I have a lot of other things to do before I get to bed. And thank you all for watching, and thank you for, I'm at 899 subscribers, which is very, very nice. I love it'd be great to get to 900 because I love the round numbers. But 880 was good too, so I'm happy where I'm at. And yeah, I'll talk to you next week probably. Bye.